Hello, my lovely sleepyheads, and welcome back to Boring Sleepy History. I'm so glad you've joined me tonight for another gentle journey through time. Get cozy, snuggle into your blankets, maybe grab a warm drink. Let's sink into some soothing history together. Where are you tuning in from tonight? Is it late where you are, or are you just starting your evening? I hope wherever you are, you're feeling wonderfully relaxed. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more sleepy tales. Hitting that notification bell will let you know whenever a new episode drifts onto your feed. Now, close your eyes for a moment. Imagine this. The rough straw tickles your cheek. The scent of sun-baked earth and ripening olives fills your nostrils. You wake with a gasp, disoriented. Gone are the soft sheets of your bed, replaced by the hard reality of a simple pallet. You're not in your comfortable home, but on a small farmstead somewhere in the vast Roman Empire. The rhythmic thud of olive branches against wicker baskets and the murmur of voices in a language you don't understand is the soundtrack to your jarring new reality. The sun beats down, and the olive harvest awaits. Join me now as we explore what it might truly be like to wake up as a peasant in the Roman Empire. The rough straw pricked my skin, an uncomfortable contrast to the soft linen sheets I was accustomed to. My eyelids fluttered open, and a wave of disorientation washed over me. The air hung heavy with the scent of sun-baked earth, a smell both unfamiliar and strangely captivating. It clung to the back of my throat, a dry, earthy taste that mingled with the metallic tang of something else, perhaps fear? A cacophony of unfamiliar sounds assaulted my ears. High-pitched chirps like 1,000 tiny bells filled the air. A low, droning hum underlay the chirping, a constant, almost imperceptible vibration that seemed to resonate within my very bones. There were other sounds, too. The distant bleating of animals, the rustle of something unseen moving through dry leaves, the occasional sharp cry that sent a shiver down my spine. It was overwhelming, a sensory assault that left me breathless and trembling. Panic clawed at the edges of my mind. Where was I? How had I gotten here? The last thing I remembered was nothing. A blank void, a gaping chasm in my memory. My head throbbed, a dull ache that mirrored the confusion in my heart. I tried to sit up, but my body ached, stiff and sore. My limbs felt heavy, weighed down by an unfamiliar weariness. Slowly, hesitantly, I pushed myself upright. My hands braced against the rough straw. The sun beat down on my face, warm and intense, a stark contrast to the cool shadows that had previously enveloped me. I blinked, shielding my eyes from its glare. The world swam before me, blurry and indistinct. Then, slowly, it began to focus. I was in a small, dimly lit room, or perhaps it was a shed. The walls were made of rough-hewn stone, the mortar crumbling in places. A single shaft of sunlight pierced the gloom, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. The floor was packed earth, hard and unforgiving under my bare feet. The air itself seemed thick with the scent of dust and something else, something faintly sweet, almost floral, which oddly calmed the waves of panic beginning to crash over me. My eyes fell on a rough-hewn wooden bowl beside my pallet. Inside, there were a few scraps of what looked like coarse bread, its crust hard and dry, and a wedge of yellowish cheese, its surface mottled with age. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, a sharp, insistent pain that momentarily eclipsed my confusion. I picked up a piece of the bread, hesitantly bringing it to my lips. The taste was rough, almost gritty, but strangely satisfying. It filled the emptiness in my stomach, offering a small measure of comfort in this terrifyingly unfamiliar world. As I ate, I noticed a figure silhouetted in the doorway. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, stood there, his gaze fixed on me. He wore simple, rough clothing, his face weathered and lined, his expression unreadable. He was silent, yet his presence was palpable, a silent assessment that made my heart pound in my chest. He seemed to exude an air of authority, a quiet strength that both intimidated and strangely reassured me. I finished the bread, the last crumb swallowed with a nervous gulp. The man remained silent, a statue carved from the very earth beneath my feet. For the moment, all I could do was wait, trying to decipher the meaning behind his watchful gaze. The imposing man, the villicus I now understood him to be, didn't speak. He simply gestured with a calloused hand towards a heavy wooden door, its surface worn smooth by years of use, the grain of the wood darkened by time and sun. The wood smelled faintly of resin and age, a scent strangely comforting amidst the swirling uncertainty in my gut. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the rising panic in my chest. He waited, his gaze unwavering, a silent command hanging heavy in the air. Hesitantly, I pushed myself up from the straw pallet, my muscles protesting with a groan. The rough texture of the straw scratched against my skin, a jarring reminder of my new, unfamiliar reality. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my trembling hands. The air, thick and warm with the scent of sun-baked earth, and something else, something herbal, almost sweet, filled my lungs. It was a sensory overload, a clash of sights, sounds, and smells that threatened to overwhelm me. The sounds, the insistent chirping of unseen insects, the distant bleating of animals, the murmur of voices, were all too loud, too insistent. Each sound seemed to magnify my apprehension, amplifying the fear that clawed at the edges of my mind. With a silent prayer for courage I didn't know where to find, I pushed open the heavy door. Sunlight, blindingly bright, exploded outwards, washing over me in a wave of intense heat. I blinked, my eyes struggling to adjust to the sudden change in light. The world outside was a dizzying array of vibrant colors. The rough-hewn stone walls of the building, the deep greens of the surrounding landscape, even the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams, all appeared sharper, more intensely real than anything I had ever seen before. The villicus stood impassively in the doorway, his shadow stretching long and distorted across the sun-drenched ground. His figure, somehow both imposing and strangely still, seemed to anchor me to this new reality, a silent guide in this unfamiliar world. His silence, however, was unnerving. It pressed down upon me, a silent weight that intensified my anxiety. It was as if he held the key to my fate, and the knowledge of that power gave him a palpable, quiet authority. Beyond the doorway, the landscape stretched before me. The air, still thick and hot, was alive with the buzzing of insects. My feet, bare on the dusty ground, felt the gritty texture beneath them, the tiny pebbles and shards of rock scraping against my soles. My breath hitched in my throat. The sheer scale of the olive grove was breathtaking. It sprawled across the hillside, a sea of ancient olive trees, their silvery green leaves shimmering in the harsh sunlight. They appeared to me to be giants, their gaunt branches reaching towards the sky like ancient twisted arms. The size of it all, the sheer number of olive trees, was overwhelming. The rhythmic sounds of work, the rustling of leaves, the soft thud of falling olives, the occasional murmur of voices, reached me, blending into a low, almost hypnotic hum. It was a sound that both comforted and unsettled me, a sound that suggested both an ancient rhythm and the crushing weight of relentless toil. In the distance, I could see figures moving amongst the trees, small and indistinct against the vastness of the olive grove. Yet their movements were purposeful, rhythmic, a silent ballet of labor that seemed to have been going on for centuries. I looked back at the villicus. He remained silent, his eyes seeming to pierce through me, assessing, judging. There was something unreadable in his expression, a blend of sternness and perhaps a hint of something else, something almost like patience. He gestured again, a slight movement of his hand, directing me forward, into the heart of the olive grove and into the overwhelming magnitude of my new reality. The fear still remained, a constant companion, but now there was a subtle flicker of something else, a tentative spark of curiosity, a fragile hope that amidst the overwhelming fear, I might somehow, in some inexplicable way, find my place here.
The sun beat down, harsh and unrelenting. Sweat trickled down my temples, stinging my eyes. My hands, raw and blistered, ached with a dull, persistent throb. I hadn't realized how heavy an olive branch could be, how relentless the sun could be, how completely alien this world felt. The rhythmic plucking, the repetitive motion, which I'd hoped might soothe my anxieties, instead felt like a monotonous hammer blow against my already frayed nerves. I longed for the familiar comfort of my old life, a life that now felt like a distant, hazy dream. The sounds, the chirping cicadas, the rustling leaves, the distant shouts of other workers, all contributed to a cacophony that pressed in on me, a constant, low hum of disorientation. I tried to mimic the movements of the others, their practiced ease a stark contrast to my clumsy fumbling. Each olive I plucked felt like a small victory, yet the overwhelming size of the grove, the seemingly endless rows of trees, continued to crush my spirit. The dust clung to my skin, a gritty reminder of my place in this new, harsh reality. My throat was parched, my mouth dry and dusty. Even the taste of the coarse bread and cheese from earlier seemed to have vanished, leaving behind only a lingering dryness. Suddenly, a weathered hand gently rested on my shoulder. The touch was surprisingly light, yet reassuring in its unexpected kindness. I flinched at first, my body tensing in anticipation of some reprimand, some further demonstration of my inadequacy. But the hand remained, a comforting weight against my aching muscles. I turned, slowly, hesitantly, to face the source of the touch. An old woman, her face etched with the wisdom of years spent under the relentless sun, smiled down at me. Her eyes, crinkled at the corners, held a depth of understanding that transcended the language barrier. She spoke, her words a melodic stream of sounds that washed over me, a gentle wave rather than a crashing tide. I understood little, but the tone was gentle, reassuring. It was a simple melody, a humming tune of empathy and encouragement, woven into the fabric of an unfamiliar tongue. And then she offered me something small, something precious, a sun-ripened olive. It was plump, almost bursting with its rich, oily goodness. The skin, a deep, lustrous purple, gleamed in the harsh sunlight. It was warm from the sun, radiating a gentle heat as she placed it in my palm. I held it, marveling at its perfection, its simple beauty. It felt different from the olives I'd been plucking, somehow more alive, more vibrant. For the first time since my arrival, a small flicker of hope ignited within me. A feeling of acceptance, however small, began to bud. It was only one olive, a gesture as simple as a kind touch, but in that moment it felt like a lifeline, connecting me to this world, to these people, in a way that nothing else had before. The scent of the olive, fresh and earthy, filled my senses, a comforting balm against the anxieties that still clung to me.
The sun beat down relentlessly, turning the air thick and shimmering. My hands, already raw and blistered, ached with a dull, persistent throb. The rhythmic plucking of olives, which had initially felt like a clumsy, unending task, had settled into a monotonous rhythm, a repetitive motion that numbed both my mind and body. Yet, beneath the surface of that numbed state, a sharper, more insistent feeling pricked at me: hunger. A gnawing emptiness spread through my belly, a sharp contrast to the heavy weight of the sun on my skin. I paused my work, the half-filled basket of olives forgotten at my feet. The sun, high in the sky, cast long dancing shadows between the gnarled olive trees. The air, still thick with the scent of sun-baked earth and crushed olives, now held a new, more compelling aroma, the tantalizing smell of cooking food. A faint but undeniable plume of smoke drifted from behind a cluster of ancient trees, its scent carrying with it the promise of sustenance. A low murmur of voices, a rhythmic scraping of tools against stone reached my ears, a comforting counterpoint to the harsh rasping of cicadas. It was a sound of shared experience, a sound of community, a sound that spoke of rest and replenishment. Following the scent and the sound, I moved slowly through the grove, my steps heavy with fatigue, but propelled by the urgent need for food. The sounds grew louder, the smells stronger as I neared the source. Rounding a bend in a particularly dense part of the grove, a low stone structure came into view, bathed in a hazy golden light. It was a small, simple building, its walls rough and unadorned, but from within emanated the warmth of cooking fires and the cheerful sounds of human voices. A low wooden door, slightly ajar, offered a glimpse inside. Through the crack, I could see a scene of simple, communal effort. A large wooden table dominated the center of the room, laden with rough-hewn bowls and platters. People, their faces flushed with exertion and warmed by the fire's glow, were seated around it, some eating, others filling bowls from large earthenware pots. A fire crackled merrily in a stone hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The air vibrated with laughter, the low hum of conversation, and the clinking of spoons against bowls. Hesitantly, I approached the building, my heart pounding a soft rhythm against my ribs. The aroma intensified, a mixture of simmering herbs, roasted grains, and something rich and savory I couldn't quite place. The simple act of approaching felt momentous, a tentative step into a newfound sense of belonging, a small act of courage fueled by hunger. I paused at the doorway, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. A man, his face weathered and lined, looked up from his bowl, offering a brief, welcoming nod. His eyes, though tired, held a flicker of warmth, a silent invitation to join their shared meal. The weight of the day's labor seemed to lift a little as I stepped across the threshold and toward the warmth of the fire, the promise of food and companionship washing over me like a gentle wave.
Hesitantly, I approached the fire, the warmth chasing away the lingering chill of the olive grove. The pungent aroma of roasted vegetables and herbs filled my nostrils, a stark contrast to the earthy scent that had clung to me all day. It was a welcome change, a comforting shift from the harsh reality of sun-baked soil and relentless labor. Smoke, thick and gray, curled lazily upwards, carrying with it the tantalizing scent of something savory and unfamiliar. My stomach rumbled, a deep, insistent growl that echoed the gnawing hunger I'd been ignoring for the past few hours. The fire crackled merrily, casting flickering shadows that danced across the faces of my fellow workers. They sat on rough-hewn wooden benches arranged around a large, sturdy table, a scene of simple but comforting camaraderie. Their faces were etched with lines of both age and exertion, a testament to the years they'd spent toiling under the unforgiving Roman sun. Yet there was a peaceful contentment in their eyes, a quiet satisfaction born of shared labor and shared meals. I felt a wave of shyness wash over me. Their language was still a barrier, a wall of incomprehensible sounds that separated me from their easy familiarity. I didn't understand their murmured conversations, but I could see the gestures, the shared glances, the unspoken understanding between them that spoke volumes more than any words could. A woman, her face lined but kind, noticed my hesitant approach. She smiled, a warm, welcoming gesture that momentarily eased the tightness in my chest. She gestured towards an empty space beside her on the bench, a silent invitation that I accepted with a grateful nod. The food was simple, a stew of vegetables and grains, fragrant with herbs I couldn't name, accompanied by thick slices of coarse bread. Each bite was a revelation. The flavors were earthy and rich, a satisfying contrapoint to the blandness of the bread and cheese I'd eaten earlier. The warmth of the stew spread through me, soothing the aching muscles in my arms and back. The bread, coarse though it was soft and yielding, a comforting texture against the rough grain of the olive branches I'd been wrestling with all day. As I ate, I watched my fellow workers, observing their interactions with a newfound curiosity. They ate with a quiet intensity, their focus on the food, but their eyes occasionally meeting in shared moments of laughter or understanding. I tried to join in their conversation, uttering a few clumsy words in my broken Latin. They responded patiently, their gestures and smiles making up for the gaps in my understanding. The shared meal transcended language. It was a communion of shared experience, a silent acknowledgement of our collective toil and the simple satisfaction of a day's work completed. The fire's warmth spread across my shoulders, thawing not just the chill of the evening, but the lingering unease of my earlier apprehensions. The shared laughter and quiet camaraderie washed away the remnants of my initial fear, leaving a quiet contentment in its place. The rhythmic crackling of the fire became a soothing counterpoint to the day's heavy labor, a hypnotic lullaby that promised rest and the hope of a brighter dawn. The aroma of wood smoke and roasted vegetables mingled with the sounds of contented sighs and easy conversation, creating a comforting and familiar atmosphere that I found myself eagerly embracing.
The fire crackled, spitting tiny embers that danced briefly in the air before fading into the darkness. The flames cast flickering shadows that stretched and writhed across the rough-hewn walls of the common room, painting the faces of my fellow workers in an unsettling, ever-shifting light. The air, thick with the lingering scent of roasted vegetables and wood smoke, was warm and comforting against the chill of the approaching night. My body, aching from the day's labor, welcomed the warmth with a deep sigh. I ate slowly, savoring the simple stew, a hearty mix of lentils, barley, and herbs. Each mouthful a small victory against the gnawing emptiness in my stomach. The rhythmic sounds of contented chewing and quiet murmurs filled the space, a comforting counterpoint to the day's harsh sun and relentless toil. I watched the others, their faces softened by the firelight, their exhaustion mirrored in my own weary bones. There was a strange sense of peace here, a quiet camaraderie forged in shared hardship. It was a far cry from the uncertainty and fear that had gripped me on my first day. I felt a tentative sense of belonging. Then it pierced the quiet, a sudden, sharp cry, a high-pitched, piercing wail that echoed through the night, cutting through the contented hum of the communal meal like a shard of glass. It was an owl, I realized, its call both haunting and strangely beautiful. The sound, echoing across the stillness, felt oddly familiar, yet jarringly out of place. The cry lingered in the air, a mournful counterpoint to the crackling fire. It stirred something deep within me, something that had been dormant beneath the surface of my daily routine. Homesickness, sharp and sudden, flooded my senses. I saw, with startling clarity, the familiar night sky of my homeland, its constellations a map of my childhood dreams. I remembered the familiar sounds of the night, the gentle patter of rain on a tin roof, the chirping of crickets different from these, the distant hum of city life, even the occasional distant siren. The scent of the wood smoke suddenly felt less comforting, less like home. It was a sharp, harsh reminder of my displacement, of the vast distance between me and everything I knew. My simple bowl of stew suddenly felt bland, tasteless, a hollow mockery of comfort. The faces around me, once comforting symbols of shared experience, now seemed distant, foreign.
The rhythmic chirping of the local crickets seemed a mocking imitation of the familiar sounds of home. I looked down at my hands, calloused and stained with olive oil, a testament to my new life. They felt alien, a stranger's hands. The rough texture of the straw pallet that served as my bed seemed less a simple discomfort and more a physical manifestation of my displacement, my separation from a life I was now merely remembering. A tear traced a path down my cheek, unnoticed in the shadows of the firelight. It mingled with the olive oil still clinging to my skin, a strange and bitter blend. The owl hooted again, its call a mournful reminder of the gap between my present reality and the life I had left behind. It was a sound that somehow both broke and mended my heart, reminding me of my loss while simultaneously anchoring me to the quiet beauty of this strange new night. Yet the sound also hinted at a strange and unexpected connection, a shared experience of longing, of distance, of the simple beauty found in a vast and unfamiliar place. I wiped my face, breathing deeply to try and calm the relentless tide of emotion. The fire crackled again, its warmth a small solace against the chill of the night and the rising tide of my memories. I returned to my meal, the simple food somehow tasting different now, laced with a complex mixture of grief, hope, and a burgeoning sense of resilience. The owl's cry had woken something, but it had also clarified my perspective. This new life, while starkly different, was also beautiful in its own way.
The sun, a molten coin in the hazy sky, beat down relentlessly. My hands, already roughened and stained with the dark purple juice of the olives, ached with a dull, persistent throb. I worked with a rhythm now, a practiced ease replacing the clumsy fumbling of my first days. The grove, once a daunting labyrinth of ancient trees, felt familiar, its shadows comforting companions in the relentless heat. The air hummed with the ceaseless chirping of cicadas, a soundtrack to the repetitive task of plucking olives. Each one, a small green treasure, felt heavy in my hand, a testament to the bounty of the earth. The captain, a man whose face was a road map of sun and wrinkles, had shown me a new technique, a quicker way to separate the olives from the branch. He demonstrated it with a practiced ease, his gnarled fingers moving with astonishing speed. I'd been striving to emulate him, pushing myself to match his efficiency. My concentration was absolute, focused on the task at hand. The rhythmic pluck, pluck, pluck of my fingers became a meditative mantra. Each olive plucked a small victory against the growing fatigue. Then it happened. A sudden, sharp pain shot through my right hand, a searing stab that stole the breath from my lungs. I instinctively pulled my hand away, a gasp escaping my lips. A tiny sliver of olive pit, sharp as a needle, had pierced the skin, lodging itself deep within my palm. The unexpectedness of it shocked me. It was like a tiny betrayal from the generous olive tree itself. I stared at my hand, a small bead of blood welling up on the injured skin. The pain was intense, a throbbing pulse that spread through my arm. My fingers, stiffening, ached and trembled as I tried to assess the damage. The world, a moment before filled with the simple rhythm of work, now narrowed to the immediate,
throbbing hurt. Panic, a familiar enemy, threatened to overwhelm me. I looked around, a silent plea for help in my eyes. My fellow workers, their faces etched with the same tired lines of the captain, continued their work. They hadn't noticed. The rhythmic plucking, the humming of the cicadas, the relentless sun, all continued, oblivious to my sudden distress. The silence was heavy, amplifying the pain and isolation. Taking a slow, measured breath, I tried to regain my composure. The old woman, her eyes as weathered as the olive trees, had taught me the importance of quiet resilience. She'd shown me how to endure, how to find strength in the simplest things. Remembering her wisdom, I sought a nearby rock, its rough texture a surprising comfort to my injured hand. I sat down, slowly pulling my water skin from my belt. The cool water brought relief, but the pain was stubbornly persistent. I carefully dabbed the wound with a piece of my rough cloth tunic, the fabric absorbing the spreading blood. The sun seemed to grow more intense, focusing on my pain like a cruel magnifying glass. After a few moments, the initial throbbing subsided slightly, replaced by a dull, persistent ache. I looked at the injured hand again, feeling a grim fascination with the tiny wound. I could see the embedded sliver, a small white speck against the reddened skin. I knew I would need help, but a surge of stubbornness kept me from calling out. The sounds of the other harvesters continued, their steady rhythmic work a calming contrast to the frantic pulse in my hand. The sun began to slowly dip towards the western horizon, casting long, lengthening shadows across the olive grove. The air cooled slightly, bringing a whisper of welcome relief to my fevered skin. With renewed calm, I decided to wait until the end of the day to seek help. I would endure. The sun, a molten orb sinking towards the distant hills, cast long, skeletal shadows across the olive grove. The air, still warm from the day's relentless heat, began to cool, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and the earthy perfume of the harvested olives. My hands, raw and aching, were stained a deep purplish black, a testament to a day spent amongst the ancient trees. The rhythmic scrape of tools, a constant companion throughout the day, had finally fallen silent, replaced by the chirping of crickets, a chorus growing steadily louder as twilight deepened. A deep weariness settled over me, a bone-deep fatigue that tugged at every muscle. My back ached, my shoulders felt stiff, and a dull throb pulsed in my right hand, a lingering reminder of the tiny olive pit that had embedded itself in my palm earlier that day. I had waited to tell anyone, not wanting to burden anyone with my clumsy injury. I wanted to prove I could handle the work. It wasn't a bad wound, just annoying. Tomorrow, perhaps, I would seek help from the old woman. Her knowing smile still lingered in my memory, a silent promise of comfort and understanding. As I started the walk back towards the communal dwelling, a sound drifted across the grove. A haunting, melancholic melody played on a flute. The notes, carried on the evening breeze, were both ethereal and deeply familiar, a strange echo from a distant past. It stirred something deep within me, a bittersweet ache of nostalgia, a pang of longing for a life seemingly a million miles away. The melody, simple yet poignant, evoked a vivid memory. A bustling marketplace, bright with colorful fabrics and the aroma of spiced meats. The sounds of laughter and cheerful chatter mingling with the lively strains of music. It was a festival, a vibrant celebration, filled with the joyous energy of my people. I remembered the vibrant colors of the clothing, the dancing in the street, the taste of sweet honey cakes, the feeling of being surrounded by loved ones, a warmth that felt as distant as the stars above. Faces swam before my eyes, faces I couldn't quite grasp, but the feeling of their closeness was undeniable. The flute music continued, its mournful beauty weaving a tapestry of memories around my weary heart. Images flashed before me, the laughter of children, the warm embrace of family, the comforting routine of a life that now seemed like a half-remembered dream. I closed my eyes, letting the sound wash over me, allowing the bittersweet memories to surface unbidden from the depths of my mind. The melody ended, leaving a silence that felt heavy with unspoken emotion. The image of my former home faded. The harsh reality of my present situation settled back into place. I opened my eyes to the dark outlines of the olive trees and the glow of the building in the distance. The sun had fully set, leaving only a faint blush of color on the horizon. The air grew colder, and a shiver ran down my spine. I continued my walk, the lingering melody a haunting echo in my ears, a constant reminder of both the loss and the growing acceptance of my new reality. The day's labor had been hard, but there was a simple satisfaction in the exhaustion, a quiet pride in having worked alongside others, even in a world so utterly different from the one I once knew.
The rough-hewn wooden door creaked open, revealing a scene bathed in the warm, flickering light of a crackling fire. The air inside was thick, heavy with the scent of wood smoke and something else, something rich and earthy, a simmering stew, its aroma a stark contrast to the lingering scent of olive oil that clung stubbornly to my skin, a persistent reminder of the day's labor. My skin tingled with the sudden shift in temperature. The chill of the late afternoon air outside was instantly replaced by the comforting warmth emanating from the hearth. The fire crackled merrily, spitting tiny sparks that danced in the air before disappearing into the swirling smoke that curled lazily towards the rough-hewn ceiling. The room itself was surprisingly spacious, a large communal hall with rough-hewn wooden tables and benches scattered haphazardly. The walls were dark, the timber aged and darkened by years of smoke and time. A few oil lamps hung from the beams above, their soft glow casting long shadows that danced and shifted with the flames. The air hummed with a low murmur of conversation, a gentle background noise to the rhythmic crackling of the fire. My fellow workers were already gathered, their faces bathed in the warm, flickering light. They were seated around the tables, their postures relaxed and weary, the tension of the day visibly easing from their shoulders. I saw smiles exchanged, quiet gestures of camaraderie, a shared understanding that transcended the language barrier that still stood between us. The sounds were comforting, the clinking of pottery bowls, the soft scrape of wooden spoons against earthenware, the low hum of conversation punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter. It was a symphony of simple sounds, each note resonating with warmth and familiarity. Hesitantly, I approached one of the unoccupied benches,
the rough wood cool beneath my calloused hands. The aroma of the stew intensified as I drew closer, a rich, earthy scent infused with herbs and spices. I couldn't identify them all, but the overall effect was undeniably comforting. It was a potent elixir, promising warmth and sustenance after a long, hard day. My stomach rumbled, a loud and insistent reminder of my physical needs. An older woman, her face etched with the wisdom of countless harvests, smiled and gestured for me to join her. She offered me a bowl, its coarse clay warmed by the contents within. The stew itself was a revelation. Hearty chunks of vegetables simmered in a rich broth, seasoned perfectly. Each spoonful was a small act of kindness, a balm for my weary body and soul. It tasted of the earth, of sun-baked fields and ancient olive groves, a flavor deeply connected to this new life I was slowly beginning to understand. As I ate, I listened to the conversations around me, picking up fragments of words and phrases. Even though I couldn't fully understand the words, I felt a growing sense of connection, a shared understanding born of mutual exhaustion and a collective appreciation for the simple pleasure of a warm meal after a day's labor. The laughter and the shared stories, though mostly lost on me, felt like a warm embrace, a welcoming gesture from people who had become my temporary family. It was in these small, quiet moments that the fear and uncertainty that had plagued me began to recede, replaced by a growing sense of belonging, of acceptance. The warmth of the fire, the aroma of the stew, the camaraderie of my fellow workers, it all coalesced into a sense of comfort and tranquility I hadn't felt since I had left my home. The lingering scent of olive oil, once a reminder of my arduous labor, faded into the background, overshadowed by the rich, welcoming aromas of the communal meal.
The fire crackled, spitting tiny embers that danced in the fading light. The air, thick with the scent of wood smoke and simmering stew, felt comforting after the day's harsh sun. My body ached. A dull, persistent throb in my muscles spoke of hours spent hunched over the olive trees. My hands, especially, felt raw and swollen. The skin, once smooth, was now a patchwork of tiny cuts and burgeoning blisters, a testament to my newfound proficiency, or rather, my lack of it, at olive harvesting. I watched as the others ate, their movements fluid and practiced, their laughter a low hum in the otherwise quiet room. I felt a pang of something akin to loneliness, a sharp contrast to the growing sense of belonging that had begun to bloom within me. It was a bittersweet feeling, this blend of exhaustion and acceptance. I dipped a piece of bread into the stew, its simple broth a balm to my parched throat. The taste was earthy and comforting, a sharp departure from the unfamiliar flavors I'd encountered since arriving. But even the warmth of the food couldn't quite reach the deep ache in my hands. I looked down at them, their battered state a stark reflection of the day's labor. Each blister felt like a tiny rebellion against my clumsy attempts at efficiency. The calluses, though still tender, were a grudging sign of adaptation. A shadow fell across me. I looked up, expecting the Velicus, his silent scrutiny ever present, but instead it was one of my fellow workers, a man whose face was etched with the lines of years spent under the relentless sun. His eyes, though, held a gentle kindness that surprised me. He held out a small clay pot, its top sealed with a simple piece of linen. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The unspoken communication between us, forged in the shared rhythm of the harvest, was clearer than any words could be. He gently opened the pot, and the aroma that wafted up was unlike anything I'd ever smelled. It was a surprisingly complex blend of herbs. A cool, bracy mint battled with the sweeter, calming scent of chamomile. It was a surprising and gentle fragrance, unexpectedly soft. He poured a small amount of the herbal balm onto his calloused thumb, and then, without a word, gently massaged it into my raw hands. The coolness of the balm was immediately soothing. The mint tingled, a pleasant counterpoint to the deep burn in my skin. The chamomile, a soothing counterpoint, eased the inflammation. The texture, smooth and rich, was a luxurious contrast to the rough texture of my calloused palms. It felt like a small act of profound kindness. As he worked the balm into my skin, I closed my eyes. The sensation was almost meditative. The coolness against my burning skin, the subtle scent filling my nostrils, the quiet strength in his simple gesture. It was a moment of unexpected tenderness, a small beacon of empathy in this new and often unforgiving life. It transcended the language barrier that still separated us, communicating a profound and shared understanding of resilience, of shared hard work, of the unspoken bonds that formed between people who labored side by side. The ache in my hands didn't entirely disappear, but it lessened. It was replaced by a sense of warmth, not just from the balm, but from the simple act of kindness. It was a reminder that even in this harsh land, under the unforgiving sun, humanity still found a way to bloom, to offer comfort, to share a moment of unexpected grace. When he was finished, he simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of shared understanding, and returned to his meal. I looked at my hands, the balm creating a soft shine on my wounded skin. They were still marked by the work, but now they also carried a subtle scent of mint and chamomile, a quiet testament to the unexpected kindness of this new life. The ache was still present, a dull reminder of the labor, but now it was accompanied by a gentle warmth, a quiet contentment. The fire crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls of the communal dwelling. The air, thick with the comforting aroma of simmering stew and wood smoke, felt warm and safe against the chill of the approaching night. I leaned back, the worn wood of the bench digging slightly into my spine, a familiar ache that felt almost comforting after the day's labor. My hands, still stained with the lingering oil of 1,000 olives, rested in my lap, the herbal balm the kind worker had given me still leaving a faint, minty scent. The quiet hum of conversation, a low murmur of voices, punctuated by the occasional clink of pottery, had lulled me into a state of drowsy contentment. The day's work was done, the harvest drawing ever closer to its end. A feeling of quiet accomplishment settled over me, a stark contrast to the fear and disorientation that had gripped me on my first day. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the fire and the low hum of voices wash over me. Then it happened. A sudden, sharp clap of thunder rolled across the sky, a deafening roar that shattered the peaceful quiet.
The ground trembled slightly beneath me, and a collective gasp rippled through the room. The firelight flickered, momentarily casting grotesque, elongated shadows on the walls before settling back into its steady glow. The cheerful crackling of the flames was now overshadowed by the chilling patter of rain against the rough-hewn roof. The comfortable hush was replaced by a flurry of activity. The murmuring voices rose in pitch, punctuated by the sharper sounds of hurried footsteps and the clatter of pottery being hastily stacked away. The air, once thick with the smell of stew, was now infused with the sharp, clean scent of rain. The warmth of the fire seemed to lessen, the cozy atmosphere replaced by a sudden damp chill. I watched, a mixture of apprehension and fascination swirling within me. The rhythmic drumming of the rain against the roof created a hypnotic rhythm, a stark contrast to the more familiar rhythm of the harvest. The older women, their faces etched with years of experience, moved with a practiced efficiency, securing the fire from the encroaching dampness and covering the food. The younger workers, their movements less assured, seemed to mirror my own feelings of anxious uncertainty. Their quick, nervous glances towards the outside world, where the storm raged with increasing fury, spoke of a shared apprehension. They moved with a purposefulness born of necessity, their actions dictated by the sudden shift in circumstances. The villicus, normally silent and impassive, emerged from the shadows, his usually stern face etched with a grim determination. He barked out short, sharp commands, his voice surprisingly clear above the thunder's roar, his gestures precise and purposeful. There was a grim efficiency in his actions, a calm acceptance of the unexpected interruption. He did not seem troubled, only focused on adapting to the changed circumstances. As the storm raged outside, the room became a hive of controlled activity. The simple act of securing the fire, of covering the food, of moving belongings to drier locations somehow became a shared dance of resilience. It was a ballet of survival, performed in the flickering firelight with the relentless rhythm of the rain setting the pace. Watching them, I felt a surge of newfound confidence, a sense of belonging amidst the storm. The rain continued its relentless assault, the thunder echoing its fury. But within the four walls of the dwelling, a sense of quiet order reigned, fueled by a shared purpose and a quiet understanding of the impermanence of things. The storm raged, but within the circle of flickering firelight, we were safe, secure, and together. We were a community, facing the elements, not in fear, but in quiet, shared determination.
The rain, a relentless torrent just moments ago, softened to a gentle drizzle. The wind, which had howled like a banshee, now whispered secrets through the cracks in the rough-hewn walls of our dwelling. The air, thick with the scent of wet earth and olive leaves, felt strangely clean, washed of the dust and grime of the harvest. A hush settled over the communal room, a silence broken only by the occasional drip, drip, drip of water finding its way through unseen fissures in the roof. I sat huddled deeper into the warmth of the fire, my body still aching from the day's work, but the sharp pain in my hand had dulled to a throbbing ache. The herbal balm, a simple gift from my fellow worker, had done its work, soothing the raw skin and easing the lingering discomfort. My fingers, stained dark purple from the olives, were now sticky with the lingering rain. I could still feel the faint imprint of the olive pit, a tiny, persistent reminder of the day's minor mishap. Then, from the corner of the room where the old woman usually sat, a deep, resonant voice began to hum. It was a low, mournful sound, a melody that seemed to weave itself into the very fabric of the quiet aftermath. It was a song of longing, of loss, of a sorrow too profound to be expressed in words. The voice had a richness that resonated within my very bones, vibrating in the spaces between my ribs. It wasn't a song I recognized, yet a strange familiarity stirred within me. The melody drifted and flowed, rising and falling like the waves on a distant shore. As the humming continued, a wave of memory washed over me, a hazy, indistinct image, but one that resonated with deep-seated emotion. It was a lullaby, a song my mother, or perhaps my grandmother, used to sing to me as a child. The details were fuzzy, the words lost to the passage of time and the distance between then and now. But the feeling of being held, of being safe and loved, the warmth of their embrace, all of these resurfaced with astonishing clarity. It was a comforting wave, a sudden, unexpected rush of love and reassurance. The song continued, its mournful rhythm gradually blending with the rhythm of the falling rain. The melody itself seemed to change subtly, adapting to the shifting dynamics of the storm's retreat. It was as if the song was composed not just of notes, but also of the quiet rustling of leaves, the gentle patter of rain, and the slow, steady crackle of the fire. The entire room seemed to breathe in time with the song, a shared experience of sorrow and comfort. The other workers, initially startled by the sudden song, had fallen silent. Their eyes were closed, their faces serene. They seemed as touched by the melody as I was, each lost in their own memories, their own private reflections. The shared silence, broken only by the song and the rain, was oddly comforting. It was a moment of shared vulnerability, a collective acknowledgement of the uncertainties and the anxieties that lie beneath the surface of our daily lives. As the song reached its final lingering note, a profound sense of peace settled over me. The sadness lingered, a gentle ache in my chest, a reminder of the distance that separated me from my past. But it was a sadness softened by the warmth of the shared moment, by the unexpected connection forged through the old woman's song. The unfamiliar land, the harsh work, the fear of the unknown, all of it seemed less daunting somehow. The song hadn't erased my fears, but it had given them context, framed them within a larger narrative of human experience, of shared sorrow and enduring resilience. In the quiet aftermath, I felt a stirring of hope, a quiet confidence that perhaps in this new life I might still find a measure of solace and belonging.
The next morning, a sharp, unfamiliar smell of wood smoke and roasting meat, coupled with the sound of excited chatter, pulled me from a deep sleep. It was a different kind of waking than I was used to, not the gradual awareness of the sun's heat on my skin, nor the insistent chirping of cicadas. This was a vibrant awakening, a lively prelude to the day. The air, usually thick with the scent of sun-baked earth and olive leaves, now carried the pungent aroma of wood smoke, mingling with something richer, sweeter, roasting meat. My ears strained to decipher the excited murmuring. It was a different tone than the usual quiet rhythm of the olive grove, the low hum of shared labor. This was a higher pitch, more urgent, with bursts of laughter interwoven. Curiosity, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself much space for lately, pricked at me. Fear still lingered, a faint shadow in the corners of my mind, but it was overshadowed by a potent blend of intrigue and apprehension. I sat up slowly, the rough straw scratching against my skin. The sun, already high in the sky, streamed through a gap in the wall, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. My muscles ached, a familiar dull throb in my shoulders and back, a testament to yesterday's work. But the unusual smells and sounds were enough to momentarily push away the tiredness. I cautiously slipped out of my pallet, my bare feet sinking into the cool earth floor. The rough texture was still unfamiliar, but no longer alarming. I felt a growing confidence in my ability to navigate this new life, a tentative, hopeful step toward acceptance. The sounds grew louder as I approached the communal building. People bustled around, their faces animated, their movements hurried yet purposeful. I could see glimpses of activity through gaps in the walls, men carrying large, steaming pots, women arranging brightly colored cloths on rough wooden tables. The air vibrated with a palpable energy, a celebratory feeling that was both foreign and alluring. Hesitantly, I entered the building. The interior was transformed. The usual plainness was gone, replaced by a festive atmosphere. Garlands of woven olive branches hung from the rafters, their leaves shimmering in the sunlight filtering through the gaps in the roof. The aroma of roasting meat was stronger here, mingling with the sweet scent of herbs and something faintly spicy. My stomach rumbled at the unfamiliar scents. People smiled at me, not the quiet, weary smiles I'd seen before, but open, genuine smiles of welcome. I couldn't understand their words, but their gestures, the way they patted my shoulder and pointed towards a table laden with food, spoke volumes. I felt a warmth spread through me, a feeling of belonging that transcended the language barrier. I sat down at one of the tables, a rough-hewn plank of wood, and helped myself to a piece of roasted meat. It was succulent and flavorful, unlike anything I had ever tasted before. The taste was so rich and satisfying, the flavors exploded across my senses. The simple bread accompanying it was equally delightful, providing a comforting contrast to the richness of the meat. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face and the quiet companionship of the people around me. It was a stark contrast to the solitude I had felt during my initial days in the olive grove. As I ate, I observed the others, their faces alight with joy and camaraderie. There was a sense of shared purpose, a collective celebration of the harvest's end. Though I didn't understand their language, the essence of their happiness was undeniable, contagious even. A sense of contentment washed over me, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. The fears I had carried with me, the anxieties of this unfamiliar land, they seemed to fade, becoming less powerful in this moment of shared joy and simple satisfaction.
The air thrummed with a joyous energy, a vibrant contrast to the quiet rhythm of the olive harvest. Laughter spilled from the small wooden huts, mingling with the scent of roasting meat and wood smoke. A simple feast, yet it felt monumental. a celebration of the completed harvest, a testament to the shared sweat and quiet camaraderie of the past weeks. My fellow workers, faces flushed with wine and good cheer, danced and sang in a circle, their voices a joyful, if slightly off-key, chorus. I found myself pulled into the current, the rhythm of their music and movement, a soothing balm to my previously weary soul. The feeling of belonging, once a hesitant bud, had blossomed into something stronger, more profound. For a moment, I allowed myself to be swept away, the anxieties of the past weeks fading into the background hum of the festive celebration. I held a cup of watered-down wine, its tartness a pleasant surprise after weeks of simple water. The rough wooden cup warmed in my hand, mirroring the growing warmth in my chest. The fire crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on the faces of the merrymakers. The earth, usually firm underfoot, seemed to vibrate with the energy of the celebration. The scent of roasting pig, rich, savory, smoky, filled the air, a potent reminder of the abundance of the harvest. I watched as the old woman, her face etched with the wisdom of years spent under the Roman sun, chuckled at something a younger worker said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. A rare sight, her laughter was like the chiming of distant bells, clear and resonant, adding a new layer of harmony to the already exuberant atmosphere. Then it happened. A sudden sharp pain in my side, like a hot brand pressed against my ribs, ripped through the festive cheer. The joyous music, the laughter, the warmth of the fire, all of it seemed to recede, leaving behind only the searing pain that coiled in my abdomen. I gasped, clutching at my ribs, my fingers digging into the coarse fabric of my tunic. The warmth of the celebration, the feeling of belonging, dissolved into a wave of anxiety. The festive sounds muffled, replaced by a frantic thumping in my ears. My breath hitched. My hand, instinctively brought to my side, came away stained crimson. A startled gasp escaped my lips. The suddenness of it, the unexpected pain, the sight of the blood, all combined to throw me into a spiral of panic. The festive faces around me blurred, their joyous expressions transforming into a sea of worried frowns. I stumbled back, away from the boisterous celebration, needing space, needing silence, needing to understand the source of this sudden sharp agony. I found myself huddled in the shadow of a large olive tree, the cool earth a stark contrast to the feverish heat that pulsed through my body. The sounds of the festival drifted to me, muffled and distant, like a dream fading into the light of day. The celebratory noises now served as a mocking reminder of the sudden, agonizing interruption to the carefully constructed peace I had found. My breathing grew shallow, rapid. Fear tightened its icy grip around my heart. The simple act of breathing seemed to amplify the pain, each inhale a sharp stab, each exhale a sigh of agonizing relief. The blood continued to well, staining my tunic a darker shade of red. The rough wooden bark of the olive tree pressed against my back, an uncomfortable but grounding presence. I tried to assess the injury, but the pain was too acute, too encompassing. My thoughts, usually a calm stream, now churned in a chaotic maelstrom. Was this serious? Would I die here, in the shadow of this ancient tree, far from home, far from anyone who truly knew me? The thought hit me with a wave of fresh panic. I focused on my breathing, attempting to slow the frantic rhythm, to find a rhythm that would calm the tempest within me. The scent of the earth, usually soothing, felt heavy, suffocating. The night air, still carrying the faint smell of wood smoke, failed to bring the comfort it once had. I was alone, surrounded by merriment, yet isolated by pain. My internal state a stark juxtaposition to the external celebration. My carefully constructed peace, the fragile acceptance I had achieved, shattered like a carelessly dropped olive jar. The throbbing in my side pulsed with each shallow breath. The festive cheer, moments ago a welcome distraction, now felt distant and muffled, a hazy memory behind a wall of pain. I hunched, trying to minimize the sharp stabs that accompanied each movement. The laughter and singing of the others, once comforting, now felt like a mocking soundtrack to my distress. I felt a prickling of panic. The familiar clutch of fear tightened its grip. This wasn't just a simple ache. This was different, worse. The scent of roasting meat and wood smoke, once enticing, now felt cloying, heavy in the air. My stomach churned, a nauseous counterpoint to the throbbing pain. I longed for the quiet solitude of the olive grove, the familiar rhythm of the work, anything but this suffocating atmosphere of forced merriment. I pressed a hand to my side, wincing as a fresh wave of pain shot through me. Then a shadow fell across my vision. A hand, rough but gentle, rested lightly on my shoulder. I flinched, expecting the Villicus's harsh appraisal, but instead I met the concerned gaze of one of the younger workers, his face etched with worry. He spoke in hushed tones, his words mostly lost to me, but his concern was unmistakable. He gestured towards a small, crudely woven pouch he held in his other hand. He opened the pouch, revealing a dark, earthy-smelling poultice. The aroma was pungent, yet strangely soothing. It was a mixture of herbs I couldn't name, but their fragrance was comforting, earthy and herbaceous. A familiar mixture of chamomile and mint, reminiscent of the balm the other worker had given me weeks ago. He didn't speak much more, instead softly pressing the poultice against my side. His touch was hesitant, careful, but firm. The cool compress offered immediate relief. The sharp, stabbing pain lessened, replaced by a dull ache. He sat beside me, his presence a quiet comfort. We sat in silence for a while, the rhythmic thump of the celebratory music a muted background to our shared quietude. I could feel the warmth of the fire, the comforting texture of the earthen floor beneath my legs. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the easing of the pain. The rhythmic beat of my own heart was loud and steady, a comforting beat against the quiet of the setting. The aroma of herbs, both familiar and strange, hung in the air. He didn't pry, didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. He just sat, his presence a quiet reassurance. It was a silent offering of friendship, a gesture that transcended the language barrier, a simple act of human kindness that resonated far deeper than any spoken word. The silence wasn't empty, it was filled with unspoken understanding, a silent communion of shared experience and empathy. I felt a profound sense of relief, a wave of gratitude washing over me. As the poultice worked its magic, the fear began to recede. replaced by a quiet acceptance of my situation, a growing sense of belonging within this strange yet somehow comforting community. I opened my eyes, looking at the faces of the others dancing and celebrating. Their happiness now seemed less distant, less mocking, and their joy somehow mirrored the easing of my own suffering. The celebration seemed less distant, more a part of my life, instead of something separate that I could only watch from the outside. I felt a deeper sense of contentment settle upon me. The poultice remained on my side, the herbs gently releasing their soothing fragrance. And for the first time since my arrival in this strange land, I felt a genuine sense of hope. It wasn't a triumphant feeling, rather a quiet acceptance, a quiet affirmation that I would survive. I would heal. I would be okay. I would belong here.
The throbbing in my side had dulled, thanks to the poultice and the quiet comfort of the shared dwelling. The festival, once a vibrant swirl of unfamiliar sounds and smells, now felt distant, a hazy memory. I sat huddled near the fire, the warmth a welcome contrast to the chill that had settled in my bones after the storm. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls, and the air hummed with the low murmur of conversations, a comforting drone that eased the edges of my anxiety. But the pain lingered, a dull ache that reminded me of my vulnerability. Then a presence. The old woman from earlier, the one who had offered me the olive, approached. Her wrinkled face, etched with the map of a long life spent under the sun, held a look of concern. She settled beside me, the scent of wood smoke and something faintly herbal clinging to her rough-spun clothing. She didn't speak immediately, but her presence, radiating a quiet strength, was somehow more comforting than any words could be. She sat patiently, her gaze fixed on the fire, and I found myself mirroring her stillness. After a long moment, she began to speak, her voice a low, soothing murmur that seemed to weave its way into the very fabric of the night. Her words were in the same language as the others, still largely incomprehensible, but her tone held a comforting familiarity. I understood not the specifics, but the essence of her story. She spoke of a harvest, long ago, when she was young, a girl no older than I had been when my life took this unexpected turn. Her tale unfolded slowly, a tapestry woven with threads of hardship and resilience. She described the sun beating down relentlessly, baking the earth to a hard, unforgiving crust. I could feel the heat through her words, the sting of sweat in my own eyes. She spoke of the olives themselves, their tiny weight in her hands, the satisfying pluck as they were detached from the branches. I remembered that feeling, the way the tiny green globes felt between my fingers. She spoke of unexpected storms, like the one that had broken over us just hours before, how they could ruin days of hard work in a matter of moments. The wind, she said, could rip the branches from the ancient trees. The rain could bruise the olives, rendering them worthless. I could picture the scene, vivid and intense, despite the lack of perfect understanding of her words. But the story wasn't just about the challenges. It was about something else, something more profound. It was about community, about the shared effort, the laughter and the quiet camaraderie among the workers as they faced the elements together. It was about the strength they found in each other, a resilience born not of individual might, but of collective spirit. She spoke of sharing meals, much like the one I had just taken part in, the feeling of belonging,
of not being alone in the face of adversity. She described the taste of simple food, the warmth of a shared fire, the comfort of human connection. Her words painted pictures, vivid and detailed, despite my limited comprehension of the language. I understood the shared burden, the quiet understanding between people working side by side towards a common goal. As she spoke, I felt a shift within me. The fear that had plagued me since my arrival was starting to recede, replaced by a tentative sense of belonging, of hope. The old woman's tale, though unspoken in my own tongue, spoke to my soul, echoing the resilience I found myself summoning each day. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the old woman's face as she concluded her story, a faint smile playing on her lips. She placed a hand on mine, a gesture that transcended language, a simple offering of solace and understanding. The weight of her hand felt both comforting and reassuring, a symbol of a shared experience stretching across generations.
The old woman's voice trailed off, her words fading into the quiet hum of the evening. The rhythmic chirping of the crickets outside seemed to soften, almost as if they were holding their breath, waiting. Her gnarled hands, stained the deep brown of rich earth, rested in her lap, the faint scent of olive oil still clinging to them. For a long moment, we both sat in silence, the weight of her story settling between us like a comfortable blanket. It wasn't a tale of grand adventures or heroic deeds, but a simple narrative of resilience, woven with the threads of shared labor and quiet perseverance, much like the olive grove itself. It mirrored my own experience, the quiet struggle to adapt, to find a place, a rhythm in this new life. Her story, so unassuming, held a surprising power, a quiet strength that resonated deeply within me. Then, a new scent drifted on the air, cutting through the lingering memory of her words. It was the fragrance of freshly baked bread, warm and yeasty, a familiar comfort rising from the communal oven. The aroma was surprisingly potent, a rich, earthy sweetness that battled with the still present scent of olive oil clinging to my clothes and skin. It was a smell that spoke of home, of simple pleasures, of hearth and warmth, a sharp contrast to the earthy scent of the olive grove, which had become so intimately familiar over the last few weeks. My gaze shifted involuntarily towards the low stone oven nestled in a corner of the communal dwelling. A low fire still glowed within its belly, casting a warm orange light that danced on the rough-hewn stone walls. The air around it shimmered with heat, and I could hear the soft crackle of the fire as the bread continued to bake. The rhythmic sounds of the night, the chirping crickets, the whispering wind, seemed momentarily muted, overshadowed by the comforting aroma filling the air. The other workers, too, seemed to be drawn by the smell. Their hushed conversations ceased, replaced by a shared focus on the oven. A young man, his face streaked with dirt and olive oil, knelt beside it, cautiously checking the progress of the loaves. His movements were gentle, almost reverent, as if he was handling something precious and sacred. He gently touched a loaf, its crust already golden brown, its surface hinting at the soft, airy texture within. The sight of him, so engrossed in this simple task, instilled a calm feeling within me. I watched as he withdrew a long wooden paddle from the oven, the heat warping the air around it. The moment he withdrew the tray of bread, a sigh escaped the gathered workers, a soft chorus of contentment as the fragrance intensified, filling the entire room with its comforting warmth. A wave of nostalgia washed over me, a memory of my own family's oven back home, of the comforting smell of baking bread filling our small kitchen on those long ago mornings. It was a potent reminder of simpler times, but a reminder that now held a different meaning. The longing for home remained, but it was balanced by the comforting reality of my place here. There was a quiet contentment in the moment. The bread, still slightly warm, was broken and shared, each piece passed around with a wordless understanding. The bread's taste was simple, yet profound, a testament to the earth and the effort put into its creation. Each bite was a small comfort, a shared moment of peace. Even the coarse bread and cheese I ate at the beginning felt different now. It wasn't just sustenance, but a reminder of how far I'd come, how deeply I had adapted to this new reality. As I ate the warm, slightly salty bread, I felt a sense of belonging that hadn't been before. It wasn't just about the food. It was about the shared experience, the quiet community we had built in this humble place amidst the endless rows of olive trees. The old woman's story, the smell of the freshly baked bread, the quiet camaraderie, all these elements melded together, creating a feeling of quiet peace. The anxieties of the past weeks seemed distant now, replaced by a growing sense of acceptance, of finding a rhythm in a life far removed from what I once knew.
A sudden, insistent scratching at the door ripped through the peaceful quiet of the night. It wasn't the gentle scrape of a branch against the rough-hewn wood, nor the familiar rustle of the wind. This was insistent, frantic, a desperate plea for attention. My heart leaped into my throat. The rhythmic chirping of the crickets seemed to fade, replaced by a tense silence broken only by the increasingly desperate scratching. Fear, sharp and cold, pierced the comfortable drowsiness that had begun to settle over me. The fire had dwindled to embers, casting long, dancing shadows that writhed and twisted across the walls of the communal room. The other workers stirred, their sleepy murmurs rising to a low hum of confusion. The old woman, her face etched with the wisdom of countless harvests, sat up, her eyes fixed on the door. Hesitantly, I rose, the rough straw scratching against my skin as I moved. My muscles ached, a familiar soreness from the day's work, but the anxiety of the unknown propelled me forward. The scratching intensified, accompanied now by a muffled sob, a sound that clawed at my heart. My breath hitched in my chest. A collective sigh escaped from the others, a mixture of apprehension and reluctant acceptance of the disruption. The Velicus, his figure silhouetted against the dying embers, remained motionless, his usual impassive expression somehow even more austere in the dim light. He offered no guidance, no comfort, only the unspoken weight of his presence. The scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, whimpering sound that seemed to emanate from just beyond the door. It was a child's cry, high-pitched and filled with a terror that resonated deep within my own soul. The heavy wooden door, its surface worn smooth by time, seemed to tremble under the unseen pressure. A wave of protectiveness washed over me, an instinctual response to the child's vulnerability. With a deep breath, I approached the door, my hand reaching for the heavy wooden latch. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat accompanying the child's frightened whimpers. The old woman placed a hand on my arm, a silent gesture of support and shared concern. Her touch, surprisingly strong, grounded me, offering a sliver of calm amidst the rising panic. The latch clicked open with a low groan, revealing a small figure huddled against the cold stone wall outside. The child, no older than 7, was wrapped in a thin, tattered blanket, its small frame shaking with sobs. Their face was streaked with dirt and tears, their eyes wide with fear. A sense of overwhelming helplessness washed over me. The child looked up at me, their gaze filled with a desperate hope that mirrored my own burgeoning sense of responsibility. I gently ushered the child inside, offering the warmth of the dying fire and the silent comfort of the shared space. The others gathered around, their initial apprehension replaced by a shared concern for the frightened child. The Velicus, still silent, observed from the shadows, his expression unreadable, yet his presence no longer felt oppressive. Instead, it was a silent acknowledgement of the shared humanity, a shared responsibility. The child, still trembling, clutched at my hand, their small fingers surprisingly strong. I felt a surge of protective instinct, a new understanding of community, a sense of belonging that extended beyond myself and the rhythmic labor of the olive harvest. In the shared quiet, the fear began to slowly recede, replaced by a quiet determination, a shared hope that the night's unexpected crisis could be overcome. The warmth of the fire and the closeness of the others, along with the small, trembling hand in mine, brought a strange comfort, a surprising peace to the night.
The scratching came again, more insistent this time, a frantic little rhythm against the rough-hewn wooden door. A child's cry, thin and reedy, pierced the quiet. Fear, sharp and cold, pricked at my skin. I'd felt a growing sense of belonging these past weeks, a quiet contentment in the rhythm of the olive harvest. But this shattered the fragile peace. The firelight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the faces of my fellow workers. Their expressions mirrored my own apprehension, a shared unease settling over the communal space. The old woman, her face etched with worry, entered. Her eyes, usually bright and keen, were clouded with concern. She moved with an unnerving grace, her gaze sweeping over the huddled figures, silently assessing the situation. There was no frantic rush, no panicked call for action. Her presence itself was a calming balm. It was the same quiet strength I'd seen in her during the storm, a resilience born of years spent under this unforgiving sun. She didn't speak, not initially. Instead, she moved with a purposefulness that spoke volumes. Her wrinkled hands, gnarled and strong from years of toil, reached out to the child who was still scratching. The sound of small whimpers was followed by a startled gasp from the child, so frail it seemed to tremble in the sudden warmth of the room. The old woman gently scooped up the child, her movements so careful it was as if she cradled a precious bird. The child, I could see now, was younger than I'd initially thought, small enough to fit within the curve of the old woman's arm. Their clothing was torn, stained with mud, and their face streaked with tears and grime. They trembled, not just from the cold, but from an unseen fear that gripped their small frame. The old woman's touch, however, seemed to slowly soothe the tremors. The child, initially resistant, gradually relaxed against her. The old woman hummed a low, soothing lullaby. It was a simple melody, nothing elaborate, but it possessed a power that transcended language. It was a melody woven from the fabric of generations, a sound that spoke of comfort, of safety, of a timeless bond between mother and child. And as I listened, a strange thing happened. The melody stirred something deep within me, a forgotten memory, a half-remembered tune from my own childhood echoed in the spaces between the notes. It was a lullaby my mother used to sing, a song I'd thought long lost to the chaos and upheaval that had brought me here. The melody, different yet familiar, tugged at the frayed edges of my heart, bringing a sudden rush of poignant memories, the scent of my mother's perfume, the warmth of her embrace, the comforting rhythm of her heartbeat against my cheek. Tears, unexpected and hot, pricked my eyes. The old woman didn't notice, her focus entirely on the child, who now slept soundly in her arms, their small chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of her song. The lullaby continued, a gentle stream of sound flowing through the room, washing away the earlier tension. A sense of profound calm settled over the communal space. It was a shared quiet, a silent understanding of the unspoken language of shared experience, of human connection, of the enduring power of compassion and kindness. It was a moment of simple, profound beauty that transcended the harsh reality of our lives. The fire crackled merrily, casting warm, dancing shadows on the walls. The smell of wood smoke and the lingering aroma of the evening meal filled the air, comforting and familiar. The night outside remained unsettled, but here, within the embrace of this community, a fragile but strong peace had returned. The scent of wood smoke and roasting meat, coupled with the distant sounds of celebratory music, drifted in from outside, hinting at a festival celebrating the successful harvest. It stirred a curiosity within me, a flicker of hesitant anticipation that warred with the familiar knot of anxiety that had become my constant companion since arriving here. For weeks, the rhythm of the olive harvest had been my world, the sun-baked earth beneath my feet, the rough texture of the olive branches in my hands, the rhythmic plucking of the olives, the sting of the sun on my skin. It had been a relentless, back-breaking cycle, but one that had, surprisingly, begun to feel familiar. The fear that had initially consumed me, the overwhelming sense of displacement, had slowly receded, replaced by a grudging acceptance, a quiet understanding of the rhythm of the land and the people who worked it. The sounds from outside, though, were different. They weren't the familiar murmur of voices during the midday break or the quiet hum of shared labor. This was something more. The music was lively, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to thrum through the very ground beneath my straw pallet. It was unfamiliar, yet somehow undeniably joyful. A feeling I hadn't allowed myself to indulge in since I arrived. I pushed myself up, the straw scratching against my skin. My muscles ached, a familiar, dull throb that spoke of days spent hunched over the olive trees. I could still feel the faint, sticky residue of olive oil clinging to my calloused hands. The air inside the communal dwelling was thick with the scent of wood smoke, but it was a different kind of smoke than the one we used to dry the olives. This one carried the sharp,
tantalizing aroma of roasting meat, punctuated by the sweet, earthy scent of roasting vegetables. My stomach rumbled, a visceral reminder of the simple fare we ate each day. Cautiously, I made my way to the door, my heart beating a little faster. The wooden door, heavy and worn, creaked open, revealing a scene bathed in the warm glow of twilight. The olive grove, which had seemed so immense and daunting during my first days here, was now transformed. Fires crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows that played across the faces of my fellow workers. They were laughing, their voices mingling with the music, their faces relaxed and bright. There was a sense of camaraderie, a shared joy that radiated outwards, wrapping around me like a warm blanket. Strands of colored cloth were strung between the trees, creating a canopy of vibrant hues against the darkening sky. A low table laden with food, more than I had ever seen in one place here, sat in the center of the gathering. The aroma of roasted lamb hung heavy in the air, mixing with the scent of spiced wine and something sweet and unfamiliar, perhaps honey cakes. People moved with a lightness, a freedom I hadn't witnessed before. They danced, their movements graceful and fluid, reflecting the rhythm of the music. I stood there, hesitant at first, unsure of my place in this celebration. The old woman, her face etched with the wisdom of years, spotted me and offered a warm smile. She gestured for me to join them, and though a wave of self-consciousness washed over me, I found myself moving towards the fire, drawn by the warmth and the unspoken invitation. A young woman offered me a bowl of something steaming and fragrant. It was a stew, thick and hearty, with chunks of lamb and root vegetables. The taste was exquisite, a revelation after weeks of simple fare. As I ate, sharing laughter and gestures with those around me, the fear that had clung to me for so long seemed to melt away. It was replaced by a tentative sense of belonging, a feeling of acceptance that was both unexpected and profoundly comforting. For the first time since arriving in this foreign land, I felt a sense of peace, a quiet contentment in the shared celebration of our collective effort. The harvest was over, but the warmth and fellowship of this festival promised something new, something hopeful, a future built on the shared rhythm of the land and the unwavering strength of community.
The music swelled, a tide of joyous sound washing over the courtyard. Flickering firelight danced on the faces of the harvesters, their laughter a comforting counterpoint to the rhythmic thump of drums. The air hummed with a vibrant energy, a palpable sense of shared accomplishment and relief after weeks of back-breaking labor. The scent of roasting meat mingled with the sweet perfume of wildflowers, a heady mix that tugged at a surprisingly tender spot in my chest. I found myself smiling, a genuine smile that reached the corners of my eyes, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to indulge in for a long time. The weight of my anxieties, the constant fear of the unknown, seemed to lighten, carried away on the buoyant rhythm of the music. My gaze drifted across the faces, each etched with lines of hardship and resilience, yet now glowing with a warmth that surprised me. Their smiles, once distant and reserved, were open and genuine. We were a community, forged in the shared experience of sweat, toil, and the surprisingly satisfying rhythm of olive harvesting. I saw the old woman, her eyes twinkling with amusement as she joined in the dancing, her movements surprisingly agile for someone who had weathered so many seasons. The villicus, too, stood at the edge of the festivities, a faint smile playing on his usually stern lips. Even he, the silent observer, seemed to have found a measure of contentment in this moment of celebration. Then a hand gently touched my arm. I turned to see a fellow worker, a young man with eyes the color of the deep summer sky and a shy smile that hinted at a quiet strength. He held out a small object cupped in his palm. It was a pendant, intricately carved from olive wood, its surface smooth and polished from years of handling. The design was simple yet elegant, a single olive branch, its leaves delicately rendered, hanging from a tiny loop of twisted wire. He didn't speak, but his eyes held a depth of understanding, a silent acknowledgment of the journey we had shared. The weeks of grueling labor, the moments of frustration and uncertainty, the quiet camaraderie built through shared exhaustion. It was all there, unspoken yet profoundly felt in the exchange of this small gift. I took the pendant, its cool smoothness a comfort in contrast to the warmth of his hand. The wood felt almost alive beneath my fingertips, as if retaining the memory of the olive tree from which it had been taken. As I held the pendant, the music seemed to grow even louder, the celebratory shouts and laughter even more exuberant. The feeling of belonging, that tentative bud of hope that had first taken root within me, blossomed into something stronger, more certain. It wasn't just about the acceptance of my new life, but about a sense of purpose, of connection. This small, simple gift was a tangible representation of that connection, a reminder that even in the most unfamiliar of places, kindness and understanding could bloom. I felt a warmth spreading through me, not just from the fire, but from within. It was a warmth born of shared experience, of mutual respect, of a quiet understanding that transcended words. The rough texture of the olive wood pendant against my skin was a comforting reminder of the past months, and the feeling of acceptance, contentment, and kinship flooded over me. I looked up at the dancing figures, their movements mirroring the swaying olive branches under the twilight sky. The night was filled with laughter, music, and the scent of wood smoke and roasting meat, a comforting balm to the soul. For the first time since I had arrived, I felt truly at home. Not in the familiar surroundings of my past, but in this unexpected sanctuary of shared toil and unexpected kindness. The pendant, a small, unassuming symbol, became a powerful testament to my new life, a life I no longer feared, but embraced.
The air thrummed with a vibrant energy, a joyous chaos of laughter, music, and the scent of roasting meat and wood smoke. Torches flared, casting flickering shadows that danced across the faces of the celebrating harvesters. They moved in a swirling, joyful rhythm, their voices rising in a celebratory chorus that I couldn't understand, yet somehow felt deep within my bones. Hands clapped, feet stamped, and bodies swayed in a spontaneous, ecstatic dance. I watched, mesmerized, captivated by the sheer exuberance. The rhythmic thump of drums resonated in my chest, a primal beat that stirred something ancient and deeply buried. A young woman, her face flushed with excitement, offered me a goblet overflowing with dark, sweet wine. I accepted it hesitantly, The cool, smooth ceramic, a welcome contrast to the rough texture of my calloused hands. The wine was surprisingly smooth, with a hint of something fruity and warm that warmed me from the inside out. I took a slow sip, the taste a pleasant surprise, a subtle sweetness that soothed the dryness in my throat. For a moment, I felt a fleeting sense of belonging, a shared joy in the collective celebration. The music swelled, a crescendo of sound that lifted me momentarily from the earth, from the weight of my past, from the anxieties that had haunted me since I arrived in this strange, sun-drenched land. I found myself smiling, caught up in the infectious energy that surged through the crowd. People bumped shoulders, laughed, and shared words and gestures in a language I only partially understood. Yet, somehow, it didn't matter. The shared joy transcended words, spoken or unspoken. But then, as suddenly as it had come, the wave of joy receded, leaving behind a hollow ache in its wake. The music, once a comforting rhythm, now sounded distant, muffled by a rising tide of sorrow. The bright, flickering flames of the torches seemed to dim, casting long, mournful shadows that stretched across the celebratory scene. The happy laughter of the harvesters faded into a dull murmur, a background hum that couldn't mask the growing emptiness in my heart. A sudden, sharp pang of loneliness struck me, a visceral blow that left me breathless. The vibrant energy of the festival, once intoxicating, now felt suffocating. The faces around me, once symbols of camaraderie and acceptance, blurred into a sea of unfamiliar features. I was surrounded by people, yet profoundly alone. My thoughts drifted back to the familiar faces of my loved ones, to the comforting sounds and smells of my home. I remembered the warmth of my mother's embrace, the comforting scent of my father's pipe tobacco, the laughter of my siblings. They seemed so far away, separated from me not just by miles, but by an ocean of time and experience. A tear escaped, tracing a path down my cheek, unnoticed in the swirling mass of people. I clutched the goblet tighter, the cool ceramic a small comfort against the rising tide of melancholy. The sweet wine, once a source of pleasure, now tasted bitter, a stark reminder of the joys I was missing, the love I was so far from. The celebratory songs felt like mockingbirds, mocking my solitude. The dance of the others became a frenzied ballet, highlighting the stillness of my isolation. I looked down at my hands, calloused and stained with the oil of countless olives. These hands, once symbols of my newfound usefulness and belonging, now felt burdened by the weight of my loss. I thought of the hard work, the sun-baked earth, the aches in my muscles, a physical reminder of my journey, of the life I'd carved out here, far from the home I'd left behind. Yet this new life, once a refuge from uncertainty, felt suddenly cold and empty. The rhythm of the drums faded into the background as the loneliness grew, a constant companion in the midst of the vibrant celebration. The vibrant scene around me became a backdrop to the silent, powerful grief that threatened to overwhelm me.
The music swelled, a vibrant, chaotic blend of flutes, drums, and something akin to a lyre. People danced, their movements fluid and joyous, a stark contrast to the stiffness I still felt in my own limbs.
The air vibrated with laughter and the scent of roasted meat, sweet wine, and wood smoke. It was intoxicating, exhilarating, and terrifying. The sheer volume of it all threatened to overwhelm me, to push me back into the shadows where I felt safer, more anonymous. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a counterpoint to the joyful music. I clutched the small, smooth olive wood pendant a fellow worker had given me earlier. The cool wood a grounding presence against the chaotic energy around me. I edged away from the swirling mass of dancers, seeking the quieter edge of the courtyard. The stone beneath my feet was cool and uneven, a welcome contrast to the heat of the day and the feverish energy of the celebration. I leaned against a rough-hewn wall, the texture familiar now, almost comforting in its simplicity. The rhythmic thump of the drums seemed to echo the persistent ache in my side, a dull throbbing reminder of my earlier pain. The fear, though lessened by the kindness I'd received, still lingered like a shadow at the edge of my awareness. Then, a gentle hand rested on my shoulder. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but firm enough to pull me from the swirling vortex of my thoughts. I flinched, startled, and turned to find her. A woman, her face etched with lines that spoke of years spent under the sun, her eyes kind and knowing. But it wasn't just her appearance that brought me up short, it was the voice. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice low and soothing, a melody in my native tongue, a sound that washed over me like a long-forgotten comfort. It was a language I hadn't heard in months, a sound that resonated deep within my bones, stirring memories I had tried to bury beneath the weight of my new reality. Tears pricked my eyes, blurring the already fading light of the setting sun. The wave of emotion threatened to shatter the fragile composure I'd painstakingly built. I couldn't speak, couldn't even nod. All I could do was stare at her, a silent plea etched on my face. She didn't push me. She simply sat beside me, her presence a quiet anchor in the swirling chaos. The scent of wood smoke and roasted meat mingled with the faint perfume of herbs she wore, a subtle fragrance that felt somehow familiar, like a half-remembered dream. She spoke again, her voice a gentle murmur, asking about my injury, my adjustment to this new life. Her questions were simple, direct, her tone devoid of judgment or pressure. It was a stark contrast to the silent scrutiny of the velliculus and the unspoken expectations that had weighed heavily on me for so long. Slowly, hesitantly, I began to speak, my words tumbling out in a rush of relief and pent-up emotion. I told her about my arrival, the initial fear and disorientation, the pain of adapting to a life so drastically different from my own. I told her about the old woman, the fellow workers, the slow, uncertain process of finding my place in this new world. As I spoke, a sense of calm settled over me, replacing the fear and anxiety that had been my constant companions. Her listening was not just passive, it was empathetic, understanding. She shared small stories of her own life, small details that painted a picture of resilience and the quiet dignity of a life lived close to the earth. We sat there for a long time, two figures silhouetted against the fading light, our conversation a quiet counterpoint to the joyous music that still echoed faintly in the distance. Finally, as the last vestiges of daylight faded, she rose, a quiet understanding passing between us.
She offered a brief, comforting smile and a gentle squeeze of my hand before disappearing back into the crowd, leaving me alone, but no longer feeling quite so alone.
The rhythmic pulse of the festival, a blend of laughter, music, and the clinking of pottery, had momentarily lulled the ache in my chest. The air, thick with the scent of wood smoke and roasting meat, carried a sweetness that was new to me, a lightness that contrasted sharply with the earthy, almost bitter smell of the olive groves I'd come to know so well. I sat on a low stool near the edge of the celebration, sipping lukewarm water from a chipped clay cup, my gaze drifting across the faces alight with joy. The scene pulsed with a life I was slowly, tentatively beginning to understand. The fear that had been my constant companion for so long was retreating, replaced by a quiet curiosity. A sudden shadow fell across my lap. I looked down and saw a small hand, surprisingly delicate, offering something up to me. I followed the hand up to the face of a young child, his eyes bright with an uninhibited joy I found both touching and unfamiliar. He offered me a small, plump fig, its skin a deep, velvety purple, almost glowing in the firelight. Several other children, their faces mirroring the first boy's excitement, clustered around him. They were a whirlwind of movement and smiles, their laughter a melodic counterpoint to the festival's more boisterous sounds. They chattered amongst themselves in a language I only partly understood, but their gestures were clear enough. They wanted me to take the fig. Hesitantly, I reached out and took the fig from the boy's hand. Its skin felt smooth and cool to the touch, almost silken. A faint, sweet scent emanated from it, a fragrance unlike anything I'd experienced before. It was the scent of summer itself, a bright, sharp contrast to the heady aroma of the roasting meats. The other children, sensing my acceptance, began offering me other small treasures, a smooth gray river stone, a tiny, perfectly formed snail shell, a sprig of rosemary still clinging to its woody stem. Each gift was accompanied by a shy smile, a fleeting touch, a brief, almost silent communication. I accepted each offering with a grateful nod, my heart strangely warmed by their innocent generosity. They seemed to accept me, not as an outsider, but as one of their own. Their acceptance, so pure and uncomplicated, eased the lingering pangs of homesickness that still visited me at night. It was a simple act, this offering of figs and small gifts, but it resonated deep within me, as if confirming what I was beginning to feel, a tentative but growing sense of belonging. The sweetness of the fig was unexpected, a burst of sunshine on my tongue. It was juicy and succulent, its sweetness surprisingly potent. It was far richer and more complex than any fig I'd had before, a testament to the sun-drenched earth it had grown in. I ate it slowly, savoring the experience, each bite a tiny moment of contentment. The children watched me, their faces filled with a mixture of curiosity and delight. Their small acts of kindness felt as nourishing as the fig itself. As I finished the fig, a quiet contentment settled over me. The anxiety that had clung to me like a shroud seemed to dissipate with each passing moment. The rhythmic music of the festival, once distant and unsettling, now felt like a comforting pulse, a reassuring reminder of this new life, this unexpected community, this unexpected sense of belonging. The fig, a humble gift from a group of children, had somehow become a symbol of all that had changed, of all that I was slowly beginning to understand. A tentative but growing sense of belonging. The sweetness of the fig was unexpected, a burst of sunshine on my tongue. It was juicy and succulent, its sweetness surprisingly potent. It was far richer and more complex than any fig I'd had before, a testament to the sun-drenched earth it had grown in. I ate it slowly, savoring the experience, each bite a tiny moment of contentment. The children watched me, their faces filled with a mixture of curiosity and delight. Their small acts of kindness felt as nourishing as the fig itself. As I finished the fig, a quiet contentment settled over me. The anxiety that had clung to me like a shroud seemed to dissipate with each passing moment. The rhythmic music of the festival, once distant and unsettling, now felt like a comforting pulse, a reassuring reminder of this new life, this unexpected community, this unexpected sense of belonging. The fig, a humble gift from a group of children, had somehow become a symbol of all that had changed, of all that I was slowly beginning to understand. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a breathtaking spectacle I'd come to appreciate in the weeks since my arrival. The air, still warm from the day's relentless sun, carried the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, a familiar olfactory tapestry now woven into the fabric of my daily existence. My muscles, usually aching with the day's labor, felt pleasantly tired, a welcome sensation after the repetitive motion of harvesting olives. I sat on my rough straw pallet, the familiar texture comforting against my skin. The sounds of the night were beginning their slow crescendo. The chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves in the gentle evening breeze, the distant barking of a dog. It was a symphony I was beginning to understand, a rhythm that lulled me toward sleep. Then it happened. A melody, carried on the wind, drifted across the olive grove. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, a whisper against the background hum of the night. But then it grows stronger, clearer, the familiar notes resonating deep within me, bypassing the barriers of language and time. It was a song from my homeland, a simple lullaby my mother used to sing. A wave of emotion washed over me, a bittersweet tide of longing and remembrance. The peaceful contentment I had finally begun to feel fractured, replaced by a sharp pang of homesickness. The simple rustic beauty of the olive grove, the camaraderie of my fellow workers, the rhythm of the harvest, all of it faded into the background as the melody transported me back to my childhood. I saw my family's home, a small cottage nestled amongst rolling hills, the scent of wood smoke and baking bread filling the air. I felt the warmth of my mother's embrace, the comforting weight of her hand on my hair. I heard the laughter of my siblings, their playful squabbles, their unconditional love. The song continued, each note a painful reminder of everything I had left behind. The harsh reality of my new life, the unfamiliar language, the constant toil under the relentless sun. It all seemed acutely painful in that moment. The simple, honest work in the olive grove, once a source of quiet satisfaction, now felt like a heavy burden, a cruel reminder of my displacement. The rough texture of the straw beneath me suddenly felt less comforting, more like a symbol of my exile.
Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring the already fading light. I clutched my hands, feeling the rough calluses formed by weeks of relentless work. These hands, once soft and delicate, were now hardened by toil, reflecting the harsh realities of my new life. The simple, honest work in the olive grove, once a source of quiet satisfaction, now felt like a heavy burden, a cruel reminder of my displacement. The rough texture of the straw beneath me suddenly felt less comforting, more like a symbol of my exile. Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring the already fading light. I clutched my hands, feeling the rough calluses formed by weeks of relentless work. These hands, once soft and delicate, were now hardened by toil, reflecting the harsh realities of my new life. Yet, even as the sorrow threatened to overwhelm me, a sense of resilience stirred within. The melody, though heartbreaking in its familiarity, was also a testament to the enduring power of memory, to the love that transcended distance and hardship. It was a reminder of the life I had, a life I would carry within me always. The song faded, leaving behind a lingering silence, broken only by the gentle sounds of the night. The emotions remained, a complex tapestry of sorrow and acceptance, longing and resilience. But as I gradually began to calm, a quiet sense of determination settled in. I was here, in this foreign land, amongst unfamiliar faces. Yet I was not alone. The kindness of my fellow workers, their shared labor, their shared meals, it was creating new bonds, new memories. This was becoming home.
A faint scent of wood smoke and roasting meat carried on the pre-dawn breeze awakened me. It was a sharper, more insistent aroma than usual, a scent that cut through the still, heavy air of the early morning. The sun hadn't even begun to think about rising, yet the familiar rhythm of the olive grove was already stirring. Usually, the day began with a gentler awakening, the slow crescendo of cicadas and the gradual warmth of the sun. This felt different, urgent almost. I sat up on my rough straw pallet, the familiar scratch of it against my skin a comforting contrast to the unfamiliar anticipation in my gut. The air, usually cool and damp with the night's dew, held a hint of warmth, carried on that insistent smell of roasting meat. It was a smell I associated with celebration, with festivals, not the everyday routine of the olive harvest. My muscles, still stiff from the previous day's work, protested the abrupt shift from slumber. A wave of slight apprehension washed over me. What could be happening? I pulled on my simple tunic, the rough-spun fabric familiar against my skin. My bare feet felt the cold dampness of the earth as I stepped onto the packed dirt floor of the communal dwelling. The sounds inside were hushed whispers and the gentle clink of metal against stone. It wasn't the usual sleepy murmuring of people waking. This was quieter, more purposeful. The flickering light of a small fire, nestled in the hearth, cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, illuminating faces etched with a mixture of anticipation and seriousness. The old woman, her face already creased with age and work, was stirring a large pot over the fire. The smell emanating from it was intoxicating, a rich blend of herbs, roasted meats, and something else, something sweet, almost fruity. I couldn't quite place it. A young man, one I'd come to recognize as particularly strong and quick with his hands, was sharpening his harvesting tools near the entrance.
His movements were sharp and precise, reflecting the urgency in the air. He glanced at me, a brief nod acknowledging my presence, but his focus remained on his task. There was no time for idle chatter. As I stepped outside, the pre-dawn darkness still clung to the olive grove, but the faint light hinted at the approaching sunrise. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and roasting meat, now joined by the sharp, earthy aroma of the freshly turned soil. Men and women, their faces pale in the dim light, were already moving among the trees, their movements purposeful and swift. They were not casually picking olives. There was a determined focus in their work. The captain, usually stoic and reserved, was directing the workers with sharp, efficient gestures. I understood very little of the vulgar Latin he spoke, but the urgency was clear. His eyes, usually calm and distant, held a sharp intensity that reflected the seriousness of the situation. There was a heightened energy, a collective focus that bordered on exhilaration. The sun finally peeked over the horizon, casting long shadows across the grove as it began its daily journey. The first rays of light revealed the reason for the unusual haste. A large flock of birds, their dark bodies moving in unison, was descending upon the olive grove. They weren't ordinary birds. These were larger, their calls sharper, more predatory. They were clearly targeting the ripe olives. The workers worked in a synchronized dance against a relentless swarm of birds, their movements a well-rehearsed response to this annual threat. The day was going to be long and the work far more intense. But unlike the anxieties of those first days, I felt something else now, not just fear, but a rising sense of purpose, a feeling of shared responsibility. This wasn't just about harvesting olives anymore. It was about defending the fruits of our labor.
The sun, a molten coin sinking behind the hills, cast long shadows across the packed earth. The air, still warm from the day's toil, carried the scent of wood smoke and something else, a sweetness, almost floral, unlike anything I'd smelled before. It was the scent of the crushed olives fermenting slowly in the great stone vats. The rhythmic thump of the press, a steady heartbeat throughout the long harvest, had fallen silent. An unusual quiet settled over the grove, broken only by the chirping crickets. My hands, calloused and stained deep purple, ached less now, a dull throb rather than a sharp pain. They were heavy, not just from the day's work, but with the weight of the olives themselves, the weight of the months of labor, of the sun and sweat, of the shared silences and fleeting conversations. I looked at them, these hands, these tools that had become extensions of myself in this strange new life. They were different hands, stronger hands, hands that understood the rhythm of the land. The Vilicus, his usual stern face, softened by the approaching dusk, approached. He didn't speak, but offered me a small cup of something dark and rich, thick with the newly pressed oil. It warmed me from the inside, a deep, earthy warmth that chased away the lingering chill of the evening air. He offered a nod, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of acknowledgement, a silent recognition of our shared efforts. I sat by the vat, watching the slow, rhythmic churning. The oil, reflecting the dying light, gleamed like 1,000 tiny stars. It wasn't just oil, it was the embodiment of this land, its sun, its soil, its history. And in a way, it was a reflection of myself, changed, transformed, molded by the experience. The fear that had gripped me those first days was gone, replaced by a quiet understanding, a sense of belonging that ran deeper than any language or custom. I was here, part of this cycle, part of this land, and in that understanding, I found a strange and unexpected peace. The distant barking of a dog, the gentle sigh of the wind through the olive trees, these sounds were no longer unfamiliar. They were the lullaby of my new home, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, truly at rest.